There is a question that has been sitting quietly at the center of American life, growing louder with every passing month. It is not a political question, it is not an economic one, it is a moral one, and the man who first asked it with the full thunder of his voice has been gone for over 50 years. But here's the thing about prophets: they do not disappear when they die. Their words calcify into the walls of history, and then one day, without warning, those walls begin to crack. Martin Luther King Jr. was not simply a civil rights leader. He was something rarer, something far more difficult to contain. He was a diagnostician of the human soul, and what he diagnosed in his lifetime, he warned would return. Tonight, we are not here to eulogize him. We are here because 6 of his most precisely worded prophecies are, right now, unfolding in real time. And the final one, the one he saved his most urgent breath for, is not coming. It is already here. This is the definitive ranked list of Martin Luther King Jr.'s 6 prophecies for 2026. Number 6 will shake your assumptions. Number 3 will change how you read the news. And number 1, the final prophecy, will ask something of you personally. Stay until the end. The most important one is last. Before we begin, understand the ground rules. These are not metaphors. These are not inspirational quotes stripped of their context. These are specific, documented warnings, delivered by a man who understood that the arc of the moral universe is long, but that it bends toward justice only when human beings refuse to let it straighten back out. Prophecy number 6, the prophecy of the comfortable silence. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. sat in a jail cell in Birmingham, Alabama, and wrote one of the most devastating letters in the English language. He did not write it to his enemies. He wrote it to his friends. He wrote to the white moderate, to the people who agreed with his goals but disagreed with his methods, to the people who preferred what he called a negative peace, the absence of tension over a positive peace, the presence of justice. He said the greatest stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who prefers a negative peace. He was not describing a historical artifact. He was describing a permanent personality type. The person who shares articles about injustice and does nothing. The person who finds the protests inconvenient. The person who says, I agree with the cause, just not the timing. In 2026, that posture has been repackaged as nuance, as seeing both sides. But King named it plainly. Silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality. It is collaboration. And the question he left unanswered is whether enough people will choose to speak. Prophecy number 5, the prophecy of economic injustice. Dressed in new clothes, in 1964, Martin Luther King Jr. stood in Oslo to receive the Nobel Peace Prize and said something the official record tends to quietly skip past. He said that the problem of racial injustice and the problem of poverty were not separate problems. They were the same wound, cut differently. We have guided missiles and misguided men. He was not speaking poetically. He was issuing a structural indictment. By 1967, 1 year before his assassination, King had moved beyond civil rights language into what he called the radical redistribution of economic and political power. Legal equality without economic equity, he understood, was a promissory note written on insufficient funds. In 2026, the 3 wealthiest individuals on Earth hold more collective wealth than the bottom 50% of humanity combined. That is not a statistic. That is a verdict. And King's warning stands in the courtroom like a prosecutor who has been waiting for 60 years. He said, "This is America's opportunity to help bridge the gulf between the haves and the have-nots." The question is whether America will take advantage of its opportunity. The silence that has followed that question is Prophecy 5 still echoing. Prophecy number 4, the prophecy of the militarized soul of the nation. On April 4th, 1967, exactly 1 year before the bullet that would kill him, Martin Luther King Jr. stood at Riverside Church in New York City and delivered a speech that would cost him almost everything. Because he understood something that most politicians then and now refuse to say aloud. That militarism is not simply a foreign policy, it is a theology. It is a statement of what a nation believes is worth protecting. In 2026, the United States spends more on defense than the next 10 nations combined. And the Riverside Church speech, the one that nearly destroyed him politically, reads less like a warning from the past and more like a description of the present. Now, before we go deeper, Before we reach the prophecies that require the most from you as a human being, there is something that needs to be said directly. If you're watching this, you did not arrive here by accident. The algorithm does not send people to a 15-minute meditation on moral prophecy unless some part of them is already searching. You are already asking the question. The channel you are watching was built for that exact kind of person. If something in the last 12 minutes has landed differently than the usual scroll, hit the like button, not as a favor, as a signal to yourself and to whatever forces curate your attention that this is the kind of thinking you want more of. And subscribe, not because this channel needs the number, but because the decision to subscribe here is a small but real act of choosing depth over distraction. King called it bearing witness. In 2026, bearing witness starts with what you choose to give your attention to. Subscribe, and then let's continue. Prophecy number 3. The prophecy of the three evils and their unholy alliance. By 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. had come to believe that the civil rights movement had been too narrow in its scope, not too ambitious, too narrow. He had been fighting one symptom of a disease that had 3 heads, and he named them plainly: racism, poverty, and militarism. He called them the triple evils, and he argued that they were not separate forces, but a single system of oppression that reinforced and required one another. He said this: when machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. He was not describing individual prejudice. He was describing a system. Remove one evil without addressing the others, and the structure remains. Legal desegregation without economic justice. Economic justice without ending militarism. Each reform incomplete without the others. In 2026, we have made progress on each evil, individually, in isolated pockets. But the structure King described remains standing. His prophecy 3 is this: you cannot reform your way out of a system that was designed to resist reform. You must transform it. The question he left embedded in this warning is one of the most uncomfortable in public life. Not, are you against racism? But are you willing to name its economic and military co-conspirators with the same force and the same clarity? Most people are not. That gap between moral conviction and systemic analysis is exactly where Prophecy 3 lives, and it is widening. He described nations that engage in aggression not out of genuine threat, but out of the need to feel superior. Leaders who divide not out of strategy, but out of ego. The drum major who needs the parade to keep watching. And then he turned the sermon on himself. He said that when he died, he did not want to be remembered for his Nobel Peace Prize. He wanted to be remembered for trying to feed the hungry, for trying to clothe the naked, for trying to love and serve humanity. If you want to say that I was a drum major, he said, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness. In 2026, the drum major instinct has found its most powerful amplifier in history: social media, the architecture of vanity. The platform designed to measure your value in engagement metrics and follower counts. King's prophecy. 2 names the defining psychological affliction of this era. The question it leaves is intimate and personal, and the causes you support and the ones you keep quiet about because they might cost you something. Who are you performing for? The crowd or your conscience? That question leads directly to Prophecy 1. But before we reach it, there is something that needs to be said. Something that was not said in the first half of this story. Something that changes everything that came before it. Because here is what the official narrative of Martin Luther King Jr. almost always gets wrong. It begins too late. It begins at the Lincoln Memorial in 1963. It ends at the Lorraine Motel balcony in 1968. And everything in between is processed through the soft amber light of retrospective heroism. But there was a version of King that the carefully curated legacy tends to protect you from meeting. And that version is the one who was losing. In the summer of 1966, King took his campaign north for the first time. He moved into a small apartment in the North Lawndale neighborhood of Chicago. He marched through Marquette Park on the southwest side, with his supporters walking beside him. And what met him was not the fire hoses of Birmingham or the batons of Selma. What met him was something he was not prepared for. Rocks, bottles, a brick that struck him in the head and dropped him to his knees on the hot summer pavement. He had faced down police dogs and state troopers. He had faced the Klan, but he had never seen hatred wearing the face of people who were not wealthy, not powerful, not the architects of the system he was fighting, people who were themselves being left behind. He stood up from the pavement and said the words that the retrospective mythology almost never quotes. He said, "I have never seen, even in Mississippi and Alabama, mobs as hostile and as hate-filled as I've seen here in Chicago." And then came the deeper crisis. Not the brick, not the mob, but the internal reckoning that followed. In the weeks after Chicago, Martin Luther King Jr. began to question whether nonviolence itself was still adequate to the scale of the problem he was facing. His aides reported that he was profoundly depressed, not the temporary depression of a difficult campaign, a deep, sustained existential crisis about whether the thing he had staked his life and his theology on was actually working. He had become the most famous civil rights leader in American history. He had a Nobel Prize on his shelf, and he lay awake at night wondering if his entire life's work was, at its core, insufficient. This is the Martin Luther King Jr. that the commemorative stamps do not show. The one who sat in the darkness of that question and chose to get up and continue anyway. Not because he had resolved the doubt, but because he decided the doubt was not a reason to stop. It was a reason to go deeper. And what he found in the depths of that crisis, in the aftermath of Chicago, in the silence of his private despair, was the seed of Prophecy 1. The prophecy he had been building toward for 15 years. The prophecy he would not live to see fulfilled. The final prophecy. Prophecy number 1. The prophecy of the beloved community's last chance. Martin Luther King Jr. did not invent the phrase beloved community. He inherited it from the philosopher Josiah Royce, but he transformed it into a moral obligation. The beloved community, as King defined it, was not a utopia. It was not a distant dream. It was a present demand. The active, ongoing practice of agape, love not as sentiment, but as will, as sustained commitment to the dignity of every human being, regardless of whether they have earned it. He distinguished it from integration, which he called a step, and from tolerance, which he called a floor. The beloved community was a ceiling without limit, the proposition that human society could be organized around shared humanity rather than around competition for dominance. In the final year of his life, King began to speak about the beloved community, not as a project in progress, but as a project in danger. He said the forces arrayed against it were rooted in what he called the violence of the soul, the refusal to see in the face of the stranger the same light that dwells in your own. He said that every generation is given a window, a moment in which the conditions for transformation are open, and that those windows do not stay open forever. That history offers chances, and history also closes them. He believed, with a certainty that bordered on anguish, that the 1960s were one such window, that the American conscience had been cracked open by suffering and courage, by the sight of children facing fire hoses, and that if the nation did not walk through that opening with its whole body, the window would close. He was right. The window closed, not with a slam, with the quiet, incremental drift of a nation that chose comfort over transformation. And here is what makes Prophecy 1 different from all the others. King did not only warn that windows close, he warned that they open again, that the moral arc of the universe creates recurring pressure points, recurring moments of crisis that are simultaneously moments of opportunity. He said it would be a moment when the triple evils converged with sufficient visibility that they could no longer be individually managed or explained away. A moment when the comfortable silence became structurally impossible to maintain, when the drum major instinct of those in power became so nakedly visible that even the moderate could not look away. He said that in that moment, the question would not be whether the window was open. The question would be whether the people standing in front of it had the courage to walk through. Look around you. Look at the documented persistence of racial inequity in wealth, health, education, and criminal justice. Look at a global economic order that even the architects of capitalism now describe as unsustainable. Look at the military budget. Look at the silence of the moderate. Look at the drum major instinct running the feed of your phone. This is the window. This is the moment King described. Not as prediction, as prophecy, which is a different thing, Prediction is about probability. Prophecy is about moral demand. It is saying, when this arrives, here is what will be required of you. What will be required is the refusal to let the window close again. Not because you are certain of victory. King was not certain of victory. Not because you can see the whole arc. King could not see the whole arc. But because, as he said in a voice that has never fully stopped ringing, the time is always right to do what is right. The reverse summary. Prophecy 6. Comfortable silence is not neutrality. It is a vote for the status quo, cast in the currency of inaction. Prophecy 5. Economic injustice is not a side issue. It is the structural twin of racial injustice, and no freedom is complete without addressing both. Prophecy 4. A nation that spends more on weapons than on its people has made a theological choice, whether it admits it or not. Prophecy 3. The triple evils are not separate problems. They are a single system that must be confronted simultaneously, with the full weight of moral clarity. Prophecy 2. The drum major instinct, unchecked by love and accountability, will corrupt every movement and every individual who allows vanity to stand where conscience should. And Prophecy 1. The window is open. It has been before. It is closed before. What happens next depends entirely on what the people standing in front of it decide to do. Martin Luther King Jr. was 39 years old when he was killed. He had been under FBI surveillance for nearly a decade. His phone had been tapped. His mail had been opened. He had received death threats so numerous that his staff stopped counting them. He had been called a communist by sitting senators and a rabble-rouser by newspapers that would later print his image as a martyr. He knew all of this. He continued anyway. Not because he had no fear. He said explicitly, repeatedly, that he was afraid, but because he had made a decision that the fear was not the point. The arc was the point. The bending was the point. The refusal to let the window close was the point. If this video has done what it was built to do, then something in the last 17 minutes has cracked something open in you. Some question that was already there has been named. Some window that was already present has been made visible. Do not let it close in the next 10 minutes when the algorithm hands you something easier to watch. Make one decision right now that marks this moment as different from the ones before it. Subscribe to this channel, not as a passive gesture, as a declaration that you are the kind of person who chooses to stand in front of the window rather than walk away from it. That you want to keep asking these questions, that you want your attention, the most valuable thing you own, given to ideas that demand something of you. Martin Luther King Jr. did not ask the people around him to be perfect. He asked them to be present, to show up, to refuse the comfortable silence, to keep bending the arc. That is what subscribing to a channel like this means in 2026.